Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a 5:05. We're going to go ahead and kick this off. We're super excited to have you guys here. Welcome to IIDA Forum's virtual discussion series. I'm Jessica Midden, brand ambassador at Corral and co-organizer of this year's IIDA Forum's discussion, along with Jason Snedeker and Gray Chang. Thank you so much for meeting us here on this digital platform, though we'd love to see you all in person. This year's topic coincides pretty nicely with the current state of the world, and we're excited to present to you this year's theme, Design for Dignity. This will be a thread running through all the IIDA Northern California chapters, but this one in particular, San Francisco City Center, kicks off the forum series and has tailored the discussion around technology and how human dignity plays a role in our approach to design, innovation, and social change at large. IIDA is the Commercial Interior Design Association, and tonight marks one of our biggest events of the year, forums, where we invite a diverse group of panelists to share their expertise and insights, which you are about to enjoy. First and foremost, we'd like to extend a big thank you to our patrons, our Platinum Patron 2, Gold, Gensler, our Silver patrons, Bronze, and you guys can, thank you, Nickel, and our Design. Great. The work that we do and the financial benefits we receive go to a chosen nonprofit beneficiary, and this year's proceeds from this event by donation will go directly to support Creativity Explored, giving artists with developmental disabilities the means to create and share their work with the community, celebrating the power of art to change lives. A follow-up email will be sent after this event with a link if you're inspired to donate. Please include the hashtag IIDASF listed at the bottom there in the donation description. Hope you're all as excited as I am for this discussion. Just to let you know, set expectations, panelists will engage in a 1-hour discussion and we'll follow that with a 30-minute Q&A. So please submit your questions as we go. You'll see the questions drop down on your GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to type those in as we move along here, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the very end. So with that, it is a great pleasure I introduce to you this evening's moderator, my fellow IIDA committee member and director of client experience at 2, Meg Ryan. Take it away, Meg.
Thank you, Jess. Welcome, everybody. We're really happy to have you here. We've been thrilled with the response. And we need to give a big thanks to all of our panelists who have taken time out of their busy schedules to be here with us. And as much as we wish we could be here or be somewhere in person with you, we're excited that we can at least have a thoughtful conversation that is hopefully inspiring and meaningful to everyone out there. So I'm actually going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. And in part of that introduction, they're going to say hello, tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do. And then at the same time, we're going to kind of dip our foot into the topic of tonight, which touches on dignity and the idea of dignity in your daily life and in your professional life. So Dave, if we could start with you, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody who I can't see. I'm Dave Evans, and I design and fabricate physical products. So mostly consumer electronics. I've spent about the last 15, 20 years in big companies and startups, doing everything from industrial design to mechanical engineering to manufacturing, and a lot of the attendant stuff that touches. So at this point, I mostly lead teams from the idea for a new consumer product all the way through the execution and getting into a box. And, you know, in terms of talking about the idea about dignity and that, one of the things that my career thus far has really taught me is that as I work between those disciplines, you understand the ways of knowing that designers have, engineers have, and even the people who are literally just putting the screws together in the things that I've designed, is to honor the ways of knowing for each one of those people and to really make sure that all those voices come forward and you're not playing favorites, right? Because it's so easy for our teams where you decide that your discipline is what you want to support, but really inviting everybody to participate in the creative process has become one of the hallmarks of my style. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Karen, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Stolzenberg calling in from Florida today. And I'm a lead interaction designer at Magic Leap, where I design and lead inputs and interactions for spatial computing. So kind of thinking in between the physical and the digital world of what it means to make space and make experiences for people. And thinking about dignity is really at the forefront of my design work and of the work that I do with my colleagues, because with spatial computing and with wearable technology, kind of dignity and human sensitivity is everything. That like we have new challenges about humans and technology, and we need to kind of proceed very cautiously and very respectfully. So have a lot of opinions there.
Love it. Thank you. Mike.
Hello. Yeah, also really happy to be here and be chatting today. I'm Mike Godlewski. I am an interaction design lead at IDEO, where I help work with clients and guide teams to create innovative solutions for all sorts of challenges, locally, globally. The main focus for my work and the types of things that interest me often hinge on experience design and trying to create moments and craft feelings and really work with people to understand what is it that drives them, what are the motivations, how can we design with empathy and thinking how dignity and empathy are closely intertwined. A lot of my work stems from being able to empathize and understand really from a deep nature the kind of thoughts and feelings and motivations that people have. So I think my connection to that really stems from putting humans first and people and understanding their true needs and what they are trying to get out of their day-to-day.
Thank you. And Sharon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Connors. I currently lead diversity, equality, and inclusion at Micron. As I think about dignity, it's all about, the definition is being worthy of honor and respect. And really, that's what diversity and inclusion is. It's about making sure employees step into an environment where they're seen, they're heard, they're valued, and they're respected. And everybody deserves that. So I'm so excited to be here to talk about this topic. I previously worked for Gensler, so I have a special place in my heart for architects and interior designers. I will say the people I worked with at Gensler were the most creative, the most beautiful, and the most kind colleagues that I think I've had. So I'm delighted to be with all of you all today.
Thank you. Well, we are delighted to have all of you here. And it's been really fun, leading up to this. We've had some one-on-one conversations that have been so interesting, and so we're excited to share that with the rest of the audience. So, our overall topic is designing for dignity, and the San Francisco City Center Committee have kind of chosen our focus within that to be technology and how that relates to our world today in regards to technology. And I think one of the interesting pieces is that we chose that topic, I believe, in November. It was definitely 2019. And as we all know, the last few months have really made that or brought that to the forefront of all of our lives. So I think that, I think we all can relate to the idea of kind of a love-hate relationship with technology, what it gives us, the challenges that it also puts in front of us. And Dave, when we talked, you had some really great and interesting perspectives on that, and kind of the idea about the pros and cons of technology and how much it has come into our lives. And I'd love to have you just share that with everyone, if you're good with that.
Yeah, I'd love to. I will start with the easy rant, and if you want to go into the really crazy one, you can prompt me. So because I build electronics, I have the dubious privilege to be a deliverer of technology to people, right? Like, my job is to increasingly just bring pixels that some of my associates here will actually use to bring you experiences. So, yes, I participate in that, but I'm also I always see myself as the tip of the spear, right? I have to be the person who gets that into the place. That also means it comes with the responsibility to think about, how do you communicate the value of the product? How do you think about what the product's going to do and get either permission to do that from your users and your consumers, or frankly, just to establish the presence. And sometimes that can even feel a little bit hostile. And depending on the clients that I've worked with, the companies I've been participating in, that can be more or less convivial. And my intention, of course, is to push it towards things that are more subservient, but not. And the small examples for me are things like, I got 2 kids who keep my work from home life really entertaining, but we don't give them tablets, right? Every other kid they know has a tablet. And for me, the reason is not because I don't value technology, I build it every day, but because I decided a long time ago that a tablet represents a consumptive device. Its primary purpose is to deliver pixels so you can experience things. And I really want to push my young kids towards being creative. And yes, there are apps that can do creativity, but I have not done a good job of steering them to use it that way. And so we just got rid of it. Get out some pens, get out some markers, because I want to push you into that place. And the technologies, those things in and of themselves, both the technologies of markers and the technologies of tablets, start to convey what their purpose is by the way you use them. And I think that's a thing that we need to be more conscious of socially, both as consumers who bring those things into our lives, but also as creators who, even though we think we're building maybe more general purpose devices or spaces, that there really are kind of core ethos built into almost everything we make. And it's worth taking the time to step back and look at what that thing is before you deliver it to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd be happy to respond to that. I completely agree, and I kind of share a similar sort of ambivalence or like mixed feelings about that. But on one hand, I love technology. I'm an optimist about what technology can sort of do for everyone, how it can change our lives. I want us all to wear computers every day. But on the other hand, I agree with Dave that technology, it's not neutral. It's a tool that is made by humans, that is made in sort of a certain sociological setting that reflects kind of other attitudes and like other ideologies, and that we have to be very considerate when we're sort of making technology to keep that in mind of like, what ethos are we putting forward, and like, is this a good ethos, or like, is there sort of dignity considered in this, or are we kind of losing sight of that?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and just add to that. For me, part of dignity is thinking about equality, right? And making sure that what we're designing has everyone in mind. And while technology is amazing and fantastic, and I can talk about all the great things we can do around diversity and inclusion with technology, particularly when we look for diverse talent, there's another side to it, right? And for example, I grew up in Oakland, California. There was a crime technology that was built using AI to predict where crime would take place. And what they found in that tool is it predicted falsely that crime would happen in neighborhoods where there were predominantly people of color. And so that was a bias that was actually built into the design of that technology, built into the design of that technology. And so as we think about dignity, it's really thinking about, how do we ensure that we are representing all people and that we have respect and equality for all people. And I think sometimes we lose that piece of it. And so I would encourage everyone, and I know we have a bunch of creatives here, so as you're creating, think about all the wonderful people in the world, all the dimensions of diversity, and how do you infuse that into what you're creating for to represent all of mankind and all of the goodness that we have. That's my 2 cents.
I can follow up with a thought there is around how if we are all creators, I think all of us here are creators, everyone is creative in some way. It's sort of just a mindset that you have. You don't have to have a design degree or something like that, but all of us as being people that can create and put something into the world, all we can have is our own life experiences, right? And so we can't really put ourselves into what others have experienced. And when you think about how dignity comes into creating things and designing what a product or what a school system or what a technology, digital, physical, what all of these things could look like, I think one of the most important parts is how can you best understand who the audience is, right? And what does that look like in order to provide something that doesn't just work for you and your own life experiences, but understanding those things and the concepts and all of the things that come wrapped up in growing up in a certain neighborhood or having opportunities and having things that influence your ideas and your belief systems. All of those, individual perspectives on, and it's important for everyone that brings something into the world. And if hopefully you want it to do something good, you're doing it for the good reasons. But like you're mentioning, Sharon, there are opportunities in which either present of like known or unknown biases can start to creep into there. And so we've seen that with digital technologies and facial recognition technologies and all of those types of things. And it's definitely a huge challenge. And I think to think about how do we design things like that with dignity, it's a massive undertaking. I think it just starts with realizing that if we're going to put something out into the world, we need to first start with understanding who's going to be affected by this. What is the impact going to have for me making something? And then what does that mean for everyone else that's going to be receiving it?
Yeah, and I would add to that, representation matters too, right? So who's designing, right? And when we think about our future, architects and interior designers, what do they look like? Are they representative of all walks of life? Do they look like the communities that we live, work, and play in? I think that that's so important to have representation from everyone.
Big time. And to build on that as well, I think, or to jump back to Mike's point, like how we do good is actually a really difficult kind of question of like, how do we like actually make good design that is equitable, and how do we make those choices? And like, it comes down to choices, like as designers in the moment of like, when we're making a design decision, like who are we privileging and who are we sort of diminishing, and like who are we, holding up as the kind of expected behavior, and who are we sort of not allowing to be present there, both on the design side or kind of on the user side. So as designers, we kind of have these active choices every step along our day, even if we don't necessarily realize it.
I think it's interesting, again, like in the situation that we're in, part of this is we have to challenge ourselves, right? We have to challenge ourselves and we have to challenge our teams, but all of a sudden we have to do that virtually. We're no longer in a room whiteboarding together and asking some of those hard questions. And I'm interested to hear from you guys. Do you feel like that reality that we're in right now, does that hinder some of this? And do you have to think harder about having those conversations, right? Forcing yourselves to have those conversations and to, I don't know, that may have come more naturally in person?
It's such an interesting question because I feel like there's two contradicting forces right now, right? One is that my world has gotten unbelievably small, right? It is presently about 1,200 square feet and filled with 2 children and a grown man. My wife's an essential worker, so she's not at home all day, right? But then there's the internet, right? Which is this bizarre slice of whatever part of humanity that algorithms have led into your lives. Like I don't believe my internet's the same as anybody else's here, and it's not representative of anything. It's barely even representative of me, like just because some series of clicks. And yet it is the stimulus, right? I used to make my design teams, when they built mood boards, do at least one, they took a photo of themselves, which meant get the hell out of the building, right? Go see something, go to a museum, go to a space, go watch some humans, not just, Pinterest boards. And I do think the echo chamber in some ways was easier to avoid when you were stimulated by actual people who weren't just in your own little head. And yet, it isn't to say that that was diverse. Like the feeds that I do have access to are coming from a much wider range of attendants and individuals and representations and hobbies and so forth. So I don't know what I feel like the balance is. I do think that it seems to be, there's a conflict there, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I would say what the term that I've heard tossed around is this is the great equalizer, because what people have now is more access, right? So maybe you couldn't go to that really cool design conference in New Orleans that you were dying to get to, but now it's online, right? So we have more access, right? Costs are significantly reduced, and you can see right now, it's amazing, some of the best and brightest talent, they're doing all this online, conversations and training, and you have this whole new platform. In addition, it's really been helpful for people with disabilities, so or special abilities. So maybe you couldn't go to that happy hour after work because physically it was just too taxing, but now the happy hour or the coffee chat is online. So in that ways, we see equalization happening, but then we also have to think about the digital divide too. So there's some people who don't have, and again, I mentioned I grew up in Oakland, California. We see the same thing in San Jose. You know, the school districts are giving out computers, but yet we have students who have no internet access in their home, right? So what good does it do you if you're not connected? So even in this time where we see so much connectivity, I feel more connected than ever, we still have some people that are isolated. So definitely within this, I think that there still is opportunity to bring everyone along.
It does reduce
Absolutely.
the interest, though, which I think like maybe I'm especially sensitive to because I build physical things, and I'm very attuned to the interaction with that in a bodily sense. And so, you know, I hear the equalization in terms of access, but that access is in a very thin plane right now. Actually, I'm really curious what Karen thinks about this because she's working in that kind of mixed space. But like the sort of access that is available, even, you know, briefly tabling whether you have it or not. But if you do have it, it's still not, it has a limited framework. Again, it comes with that lens, and we have to think about what that lens, how that influences your experience of those things.
Yeah, and just to say, I'm sort of like on the maybe widest end or the far out end of the digital divide of sort of pushing what's possible, but also recognizing that very few people have access to sort of that technology at this point, and that it's not yet widespread, but that there's kind of a beautiful opportunity when more people do have access to that, because of like what this technology enables is kind of so exciting for exactly this use case. So I think like in this particular moment in time, the kind of time of COVID has really made me appreciate spatial computing and the idea about remote communication and remote co-presence and the ability to collapse space. And so instead of just sort of talking to you guys through screens, we can sort of share space, you know, in the exact same space, even though we're physically not present with each other. So I am kind of living in like the optimistic future about ways that we can connect in kind of more three-dimensional ways and more embodied and like more expressive ways in the future. But recognizing too that there's a lot of work to kind of bring everyone along to that. I think that's something that we just need to like keep in mind, that it's for some yet, but not quite everyone. But it should be for everyone.
Karen, maybe you can give the audience a little bit more information of some of these products that you guys are creating, right, that allow you to interact virtually. And I know, like Sharon, you when we talked, you've actually participated in this, but I don't know that our audience really understands what that is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can like pull out sort of fun things from my bookshelf. So, you know, like broadly AR and VR and XR, you know, like there's so many different forms of kind of expanded realities, whether it's like from a smartphone that like you can kind of look through it and see expanded augmented realities, or, you know, be in a virtual space and see virtual realities that are, you know, all kind of made up or places elsewhere, or the device that I work on, which is our Magic Leap device, which actually is a pass-through spatial computer, so that you can kind of see digital content in the physical world around you. That we now have all these options to kind of explore new combinations of physical space and digital space and new collapsing kind of techniques. And some of the really exciting kind of opportunities also offer web support. So some VR apps like AltSpace or Mozilla Hubs, you can join through any of these platforms and kind of meet in a shared space altogether. So there's kind of a lot of exciting possibility about ways to hang out virtually.
I have an interesting take on this, having sort of had my process upended in, I guess, related to what Dave was saying, where when we're making things in my physical in the office that I would previously go to, there's an embodied experience, and it's between people, and it's with the process and the things. It's kind of combining all of this into one like magic moment where it clicks, right? Everything just like makes sense. You can see it, you can feel it, you can kind of sense the energy of everyone around you. And something that I've experienced firsthand is that the social circles or the connections and the people that you know and all of these things that even just seeing all of you on the screen right now, I think in the COVID era, right, in the the past couple of months, I have had very few conversations with people, and I'd love to also meet people that have expressed this, because I don't have this opinion, but it's been very challenging to meet new people. And when we talk about like how does the internet and technology and the new future, the new normal of what we're entering, what does that mean for connecting and being more social and being more creatures of, right, combining minds and being in the same space and having that ability to bump into someone casually or randomly and have sort of amazing builds off of each other, right? Like I don't have those. I have lots of scheduled moments. I have lots of meetings all day. I have lots of digital screens that I'm looking at, and I'm trying to do my best to imagine what that's like in the real world. But for me, it's been a huge challenge, because a lot of what I think inspires me and the things that are really driving a lot of my passions are those in-person embodied experiences that you can sense. It's almost like we have the sense as human beings when we're around each other, the energy in the room and what's going on. And I think when we talk about what has digital experiences, like, yes, I 100% agree that access is hugely important, and we just need more of it. We need to get more access to more people to bring equity levels up. But I'm also sensing firsthand that there are things missing in these experiences, and that I haven't met a new person in the last 4 months while I've been locked down and for COVID. And so it's this interesting tension that I've experienced, where yes, we have my ability to chat with people all over the world is great, but there's not really a great way to do that in which I feel a deep sense of connection with those people. It's more of just cursory, here's a quick meeting, here's a webinar, here's whatever it is, and then they're gone like the wind. So that's my kind of take on there's digital connections that we can make, but I feel like the long lastingness that we've experienced in person is sort of something that we've lost.
Or I would agree or
feel that. Yeah. No, please.
Just to say, like, yeah, I think now I'm more online than ever, kind of seeking that type of rich connection that like I used to get day to day with my coworkers, and try to get through technology, but it's not quite the same. And like through things like Twitter, finding like serendipitous moments of joy, and I think that adds a lot of richness. But it doesn't quite have the dimensionality or like the embodiment of some of these other virtual spaces.
I would say for me, my interactions they're scheduled. So I have a cooking class that I do every Friday at 6 with my girls. And I've met some new people through that. But again, it's a scheduled event that happens, and people can bring other people, but it is very intentional. So I think that's the difference, Mike. And I can totally relate to that as an extrovert. It's like I'm used to just meeting people at the store and talking to them and get their number, or if it's at Starbucks, and just making it connections. That's where I get my energy from. And now it just feels like you have to almost create that for it to happen. It's not organic anymore. And so for me, that's the big difference.
I've even heard people say that seeing people's hands in conversation brings something to, right? And I noticed that, Mike, when you were talking, that I could see your hands, and that's, and anyway, it's just one of those little nuances that you would never think of in face-to-face interaction. I do want to take just a moment to remind everyone in the audience to please submit questions. If you have questions, you can do that at any time. We're going to be continuing the conversation for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we have time at the end for questions. So please type them in as you think of them, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the end. One of the other things that we talked about as a group was really like kind of the idea of technology and privacy, right? And, Karen, I think this is something that you have experience in, but like as we start to create some of this technology that allows us to meet and portray ourselves virtually, right? How do we try to do that in a way that maintains not just privacy, but dignity, right? I don't know, it's just something that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, and I think those are really kind of concerns at the forefront, and we also sort of see those on this webinar. You know, we were discussing what our backgrounds look like, and the fact that you can see my space, and that's maybe more than I was intending to share. And when we were designing one of these products that I work on, that is actually for embodied communication, it's called Avatar Chat, where we can sort of talk remotely as avatars, like a kind of a realization of the experience that we didn't necessarily set out to design. But kind of an added benefit was that it doesn't show necessarily my space, or it doesn't necessarily show my real face. I'm sort of inhabiting an avatar, I'm inhabiting a character that I choose and that I design and that I kind of express my identity in. But it's a little bit more private and sort of perhaps comfortable than like webcam on than this kind of experience, or that these virtual spaces allow us to sort of more selectively reveal what we want about ourselves and to portray ourselves in different ways than we're sort of like forced to with just existing camera technology. So I think there's like a really exciting future of like virtual humans and virtual presence, and that hopefully we'll have systems, and again, the design of the system, you know, relates to this, but hopefully we'll have systems that allow ourselves and, you know, each other to express ourselves in a lot of different ways, and not just one prescribed kind of form of remote representation. So I look forward to an exciting, diverse avatar future.
I recently attended a conference. It was a diversity conference, and it was virtual, where you set up your avatar and then they had speakers. I was a speaker, so you walk in, and it was very odd. Like, I enjoyed it, but it was a little clunky to get used to. And I stood up in the middle of the meeting and I couldn't figure out how to sit myself down. But it was also really cool too, because they had breakout rooms. So you could walk in. So, talking about like meeting new people, you could meet someone at the conference, and then the two of you could walk your avatar into a different room and have this virtual conversation. So it did simulate more of a conference type of connection, but it definitely was a different experience for sure.
I'd love to hear more about that, or like, what did you think of the avatars, or like, what did you think of the quality of interaction, you know, avatar to avatar?
I love the amount of representation and all of the diversity dimensions. So I was able to wear my glasses, and they had my skin tone and different hair colors. I didn't have orange hair at the time, but that, you know, even different body types. So that I thought was very inclusive, and I thought that that was a good experience. I think again, it just takes some getting used to as far as the technology and learning how to navigate and even walk the avatar around. But I will say I enjoy the experience. I'll say that. And I can see the benefit of being able to host a conference in that manner and reach a variety of people through that forum. So it was a new experience, but Karen, I enjoyed it, and I would definitely do it again. And I even thought about it for my team members, you know, and we're running some employee resource groups, and, you know, how do we get them all together? Maybe we do it in this new virtual world. And I'm a little older too, so I'm a slow adapter. So keep that in mind. Other folks on this call may be able to quickly jump in and use the avatar with no issues.
I'd love to
Don't
add
give us too much credit.
I'd love to add a little more thoughts on this one, because it's actually related to some work that I'm currently doing. But it's the idea that when we enter a space, if it's virtual or physical space, there's a certain amount of comfort that we would hope to achieve in that. And usually that's in being able to feel comfortable enough that you can start feeling vulnerable, that you can start to reveal pieces of yourself and expose, you know, truths of who you are to others in the space, or be able to relate to it in some way. And so a lot of like me clunkering around this app and trying to figure out how do I actually share my audio earlier is indicative of that, right? And I don't feel super comfortable. I'm going to click the wrong button, that I'm going to mess something up, that suddenly my video, and I don't feel that the safety, the vulnerability of just me knowing how to interact with it. I think that's in one sense like what we're talking about. But there's also the idea of inclusiveness, of what Sharon's saying, where it's when I look around the room, is it an avatar of someone that's virtually represented? Is it a video feed of people that I can see are like me or are not like me? All of these things that I'm entering spaces and trying to make relations to, they're really big questions, right? About how safe and do I feel in this area, if it's digital or physical? And then is it creating a space that I can feel brave? Is it provoking me in such a way that I can have my own thoughts and opinions vocalized, right? And not feel like I'm going to be attacked or sort of targeted in some way. So it's this interesting idea that even though now we have so much more ability to connect in these digital spaces, we are hoping to achieve this level of equality, and we're always striving for equity and making everyone's on sort of the same level. And yet there are these interesting unforeseen consequences of when we enter into a space, and especially if it's digital, you know, what are the other things that can be, going back to our earlier conversation, things that no one thought about? Like what if I'm not able to represent a very important critical part of my identity, but the designers of this space didn't think that was important, right? And so suddenly I feel like I'm the one left out and everyone else feels comfortable in their avatar being. So it's this, yeah, I think it's just this interesting idea of now that we're entering this mixed reality space of communication and trying to connect, what gets lost and how do we best attempt to like recreate or create a new version of that.
And to add on that as well, that's where you sort of see all of these issues come together, where the question of access becomes real, or like becomes literally embodied. I mean, it's always real, but like if I'm joining through, you know, a desktop, I might not have hands. Whereas like if I'm joining through a VR system, I might have 3 hands or more hands. And so those kind of like differences of how people are approaching the technology are made very kind of stark and visceral. And so it's just a reminder of, you know, kind of supporting different modalities and making sure that we can sort of accommodate different points of view and, you know, different people as they come.
One of the things, Mike, you mentioned was unforeseen consequences. And I think one thing that we haven't touched on yet, but Dave, that you had some interesting thoughts on, was kind of the digital assistance and the prevalence of that now in our lives and some of the things that come along with that.
All right, let's do it. Let's buckle up. So, I mean, I didn't have any comments on that last conversation because the truth of the matter is I'm like, my bias is the other way. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I take a really long perspective on human experiences. But what's interesting to me is the crossover to create continuity is where supernatural capabilities really start to emerge. And so, you know, for me, this started very specifically around designing a digital assistant for the home. The last startup I was with was founded by the guy who started Android, and he decided he wanted to move into everybody's homes, and he meant everybody's homes. And he wanted to be the person who drove everybody's homes. And like, what does that mean? Like, let's really fundamentally think about creating a digital identity that lives in your house, part of your family, part of your partnership. How do we unpack that? So I stepped all the way back. And when I mean that, I mean like literally anthropology grade, step all the way back. And I saw kind of these 2 parallel schemes that I think tee up where my nervousness around digital assistants and the thinness between virtual spaces gets really tricky. So sequentially, I'm going to crib some notes so I'm accurate. If you look at like the way I think humans have interacted with their environments, you start 2 million years ago when everything's pure form. We are roving bands of proto-hominids. It's like rocks and sticks. The thing is, the shape is its function, right? You move eventually into what becomes human, and that's like language. Language drives our humanness. That emerges about 200,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago, you start to get art. That's when we start painting things. 5,000 years ago, we start to turn that art into language. You get graphical representation of language. Then a couple thousand years later, that turns into writing, and the writing starts to create linear thought. Linear thought begets mathematics and logic, and eventually we turn that into computers about 80 years ago. So we have this sequence in which humans have evolved into higher order thinking that starts from form and moves through form, language, graphical language, written language, and into abstraction. And then what happens is computers, we take the intelligence that we built into that, the machine intelligence, and we start building it back down the stack, right? At first you start coding and all you have access to is typing. You have that, or like truly at the very beginning, just the math. It's just the math. And then you're like, oh, let's make code. And so code gives a way to type into computers, but it's not that accessible. So we'll put a graphical layer on it. So go back down that chain. And now we're in this voice era where you get this much more intimate experience, a much more literally primitive experience for humankind to talk to that intelligence. And eventually, and we're moving towards these places where the intelligence will just be embodied in the objects themselves, whether you're wearing them on your head or on your body or they're in your space. And you already see the hints of that. What makes me nervous about those things is we have never had intelligent actors actually embody in a perceivable way those spaces, right? So if you look at the parallel experience of how people start to interact with their environment in terms of these supernatural capabilities, you're really starting to talk to a degree about the history of religious beliefs. And if you go back to those kind of proto-hominid experiences, you get into mostly animism, broadly across the earth, where individual agents, if you want to use the abstracted term, these, whether deities with big G gods or small G gods, have this capability of interacting with you because they know things about your life, they have some potency. But traditionally, these things were not super gods. They're not capital G gods. They're not omni-capable. They are, maybe they know how to work on grain, or they can make people love each other, but they can't do both. And they're often kind of inept. You have to trick them, so you offer them things or you tell them certain stories, and they do or do not help, right? And then eventually over time, as we get more powerful technologies, our gods get more powerful too, until we come to, in that axial age, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, God gets really capital G and it's super potent, it can do anything. We've brought some of those models into our digital worlds where the omni knowledge of the internet delivered through the omnipresence of an Alexa device that sits in every corner of your house, because it went from being in this little icon, if you want to keep using the language that lived on your shelf, to being in the microwave and in the refrigerator, in your car, and in the ceiling fan for whatever reason, right? So now you start to spread this into all of our devices in our spaces. And that spread of omni, and the potency is still kind of in that animist phase where right now Alexa's primary capability is telling you dumb jokes and shipping you stuff really quickly, right? Which is pretty potent in a lot of respects, it's especially now because it's the only way I get anything. But it's growing. So those omnis, the big omnis of the omnipresence of technology, the omni expression of those things, and the dephysicalization of that capability, for me, really starts to touch on these fundamental experiences that we all share. Whether or not you believe in the supernatural, it is an expression of mankind that has always been in those urges that are very intimate and very innate to our beings. On the lower level stuff, and we're building technology today at a level that interacts with that sensibility we've never had access to before. And I don't know that it's fundamentally dangerous in the traditional sense, but it is something that we should probably be more careful about than trying to get out a quarterly release, right, or an OTA that goes to your device. So yeah, I have thoughts about the omnipresence of technology and how we interact with it.
We may need a whole other panel discussion on that, right?
I'm gonna need a tutorial.
Right?
We can unpack
right? We can unpack it. Some of the things that we talked about previously were really, I think, moving in some of the work that you do, right? And the connections that you need to make with your clients or with the populations that you're looking to serve, right? That used to be done so much in person. And some of the differences, and now you have to do some of that over video, or, I'm assuming you're not doing it via avatar at the moment, but maybe, yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping to.
Yeah, right. But I'd love to. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about some of those thoughts on what you miss and what you may also gain from doing some of these interactions in person versus virtually.
Sure. I can tell sort of a classic story that is just echoing in the eternal halls, I think, of IDEO, which is long ago, not myself, but a different team was doing research in the fields and trying to interview and understand people for a health product that they wanted to release. And so what we do is we go into people's homes and we interview them in context, in the places that they are maybe using the product or most comfortable or what have you. But we get to experience a little bit about who they are and not just inviting them into our office, right, to conduct an interview. We're trying to go to them and see how they interact with the world, how they choose to construct their own reality. And so the team goes into the house and they start conducting this interview, and it's with a husband and a wife, because it's a lot of health products are actually support systems. It's not just you using a health product, it's you and your partner, other people that you're trying to support. And so there's questions about, oh, what does your routine look like? Do you have any kind of self-care? And the husband goes, no, I don't have any self-care. I'm a pretty simple man. I'm a construction worker. I work all day. I come home. I go to sleep, wash, rinse, repeat. And the wife tells a story, and she's like, oh, I try to take care of myself and make sure that I get enough sleep, and I'm eating well, and I'm also leaving a little bit of time to relax. And so the conversation was about to move on, but one of the IDEO team members noticed that right next to the couch where we're conducting this interview, there's a foot bath. And the interviewee asks, oh, is this one of your foot baths? And sort of indicates to the wife, like, is this your foot bath at the end of the day that you're gonna submerge your feet in? And she goes, no, that's not my foot bath. And the construction worker goes, oh, that's mine. Like, I have calluses, I have really rough, scratchy feet, and that's something I just do every day to take care of myself. And I just need that because I have boots that are kind of like roughing up my feet every day, and that is just the way that I help take care of that. And so in his mind, he had no idea that self-care was a foot bath, right? And it was this idea that what you are doing for yourself and that what you are helping to take care about your physical presence and the things that you're doing, he just didn't connect that as part of the question that we were asking. And so if we were asking that question on Zoom, or if we were asking that question on a telephone, or if we're asking that question in our office, that insight would have been lost around, oh, people don't actually perceive things like foot baths as self-care. They just perceive it as a regular part of their life. How can you abstract that into other decisions people are making about what they see classifying in the ways that we have terminology and like Dave was just saying, like the way that we have human language evolve over centuries and things like that. And so I think that the learning here is that being in person and being able to not just ask people, right, to like tell you what's wrong, like what are your pain points, and like tell me what's going on, but actually being able to observe and see with your own eyes what is their reality, right? And so that's sort of what historically I'm familiar with, is going in person into someone's house and getting to know them a little better. And so an interesting build that we've had since COVID time, where we're not able to do that. I've done now 3 or 4 projects completely remotely, and we have no opportunity to go into people's houses. But one way that we've overcome that is actually asking people prior to conducting the interview on Zoom to give us a diary. And we actually ask them to be a little bit more vulnerable than typically we're able to do when we try to build that in-person rapport. When we're trying to awkwardly meet someone and we're not going to fit on their couch, they have to go into the closet and get a chair out, and then we're doing this whole shuffle. We just ask them to say, hey, can you take a day and walk around your house and document things that you're doing? Or what does your self-care routine look like from day to day? Or show us what your bathroom looks like if this is a healthcare. You know, there are different ways that we've realized we have greater insight and more access now. Whereas previously I would have felt very uncomfortable saying, hey, that's your foot bath. Now can I look at your bathroom? Now can I look in your closet? Now can I look under your bed? You know, like those are very private spaces that we've never had access, even though we're in the house. And now with digital and with removing the layer, I feel totally fine saying, this is for the project. I'm not going to post this online, but it'd be great for us to learn if you could share with us what is under your bed, what is in your closet, what does the inside of your medicine cabinet look like? Those are the sort of questions that I think help us understand even more deeply than we were ever able to achieve before, how and why people are doing the things that they're doing in an anthropologist sort of view. And that's sort of my big learning, I think, through COVID time so far has been, there you lose a lot, obviously, like what I was speaking to earlier about the energy and being able to build off of each other in a room and kind of feel that presence. But there are some things too that we're learning that are enabled through digital, and that hopefully we'll find more of those opportunities, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, just to add.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave. I'll jump in.
I already had a long one. Go ahead, Sharon.
No, I was just going to say I think one of the silver linings is that things that were deemed really inappropriate in the past in the workplace aren't necessarily inappropriate anymore. So having your kid run in, or my grandmother lives with me and she's 92, so she turns the TV on 1,000 and I'm in the meeting and Jeopardy is on in the background super loud. Like that would have been unheard of 3 months ago. But what you're really seeing now is the authentic person. So you're seeing my home and I like things very clean and crisp, and you get to see that Dave is from California and you see that Mike has a beautiful plant in the background. So it's like all these things that we never knew about each other, and these family members, and just the artwork. It's like we're seeing a very different side of our team members, and that to me is creating a different and deeper connection, and people aren't masking as much. So I know I spent a lot of my career masking who I am and trying to be very professional and fit into a box and, not have orange hair or whatever it is. And now it's like, it's just that, hey, this is who I am. This is authentic me. It's a lot going on. It's COVID-19. So get to know me, get to know the real me. And I think there's something so refreshing about that. And so for me, that is the silver lining.
Yeah, it's a similar. So the riff I was going to go on up to now, it's like similar that the way we express that intimacy, the way we invite people into our homes, is shifting. It is, I think, to a degree generational. With understanding what things, again, to Mike's point specifically, there are still places we've cordoned off. I think the range of things that we give people access to is increasing. Especially as it becomes a shared experience. It's no longer asymmetric. You can see everybody's weird background, and you're all kind of in that same boat together, and that's relatively important. I worked with a company recently that was building stay-at-home. Doesn't work anymore. Ways for people who were losing mobility, especially as they got older, to live in their homes longer and not worry about, especially fall. So they're doing fall detection, and they're using radars, which meant that you could put a device in your home and sense where people were and how they're moving and if they'd had an accident without putting camera in their space. So you're not seeing their things. They're not worried about, a hacker taking pictures of them falling over in their underwear, because it's not even a possibility. And, it ties really strongly design for dignity aspect. The flip side as builders, as designers, is that invited tremendous technical headaches, right? The technologies are being built in cameras. They're being built for, self-driving cars. They're looking at these things. It'd be easier to go to the university research center and take the technology that's coming and just apply it directly because it's already turnkey. And that's the way that, frankly, a lot of development around here gets done. I have a PhD and I got some funding. Let's go build a product that achieves this thing without considering the client and the user and the customer the way they want to be considered. Just because you can, and maybe even that is valuable. If you had a camera that saw somebody fall in their home, it would surely still see some adoption because the value is there. But it doesn't honor that individual. And I think it's incumbent upon companies and teams to really be willing to fight the right fights that are important to maintaining people's dignity and retaining their privacy and respect in those places where you understand it's important, even if it's going to cost you a little bit more. It's like just doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add on to that too, that kind of in this COVID time, like those moments of digital embodiment and digital touch and digital emotion feel kind of all the more important and critical and rich. That to Mike's point of like, we kind of can't go and interact with people as we used to be able to in some of these digital spaces with avatars and other digital embodied collaboration apps. Like now we can actually like get into a more like informal working environment with our remote colleagues and like move around and flail our bodies and be expressive and actually like communicate and sort of feel a sense of presence and feel a sense of self and communication with others. And that just is sort of like such a refreshing feeling to kind of get up and move around as opposed to just sitting statically in front of a webcam. So I think the kind of upside in a lot of this kind of work in the time of the pandemic is really using this technology for movement and for kind of liveliness that we don't get through kind of other forms of technology.
One last tip I'll offer, maybe before, I think we're at the hour here, but to build on your point, Karen, is, and also Sharon was talking about the lack of like what does that look like when we're entering spaces and I can be a different version of myself now that I'm at home. One tip or one thing that I find really successful now that we're all digital is something that we call a creative warm-up. And it's just a way to start our day as a team or as a meeting or whoever you're interacting with. And it's a way to recognize and own the fact that this is our reality, right? We're all sheltered in place. We're all at home somewhere. Our environments are very different than what we used to be in. But it's a way to be creative. Like I was saying earlier, everyone has this spark of creativity and you just have to know how to unlock it in certain people. And it's asking the prompt, asking the question, what is an important object that's in your house? Can you bring, we're gonna take a minute and just kind of scavenger hunt, find this object. What is this object that is meaningful to you in some way? Bring it back and we're gonna share. We're gonna do a small group share and almost like a show and tell us a story. Why is this object that you brought to us so meaningful? And it's in your home, right? I never would have seen this interacting with Sharon or Dave or Karen beforehand. But now that I'm in their homes, I can see that this totem, this thing has such a long historical importance. And so I've developed a deeper relationship, even though I'm no longer in the same room. I understand the story that you just told that informs who you are and the decisions and how you come to the table as a designer, as a creative. So I think it's a really inspiring thing that we found to be successful is in thinking about this creative warm-up and all sorts of, you can search online, there's tons of them, but this one in particular I found is really powerful to start bridging that gap of recognizing like, hey, we're all in our homes. Let's share a little bit about what makes that special and what makes that the essence of who we are and start to connect at a deeper level, even though we can't be in the same room together.
Love it. I'm looking for something right now. I can't find anything.
I know I was debating, like, do we try to do it? Is that too much? Too crazy? Well, I do think we're on the hour, and we do have some great questions that I think people would be happy to get answered. Thank you all. It's so fun to be able to have these conversations and be inspired and, be challenged and to be able to bring that to our greater audience. So the first question I'm going to ask, sorry, hold on one second as I manage this technological question. Okay. If we move toward a more virtual world, what will offices and workspaces look like, as well as collaboration and meeting between colleagues? I personally have found it difficult to collaborate in a virtual space. Does that move anyone?
I have some thoughts there.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll see the office continue to shrink. I think currently with kind of other trends in workplace design, and I used to work at Gensler too, so kind of disclosure there, but other trends in workplace design, we're seeing the shift towards benching and open offices and like sort of less fixed space and kind of towards hot desking. And I think like remote work just further accelerates that and even says that conference rooms and scrum rooms and kind of those different types of meeting spaces, can those move into virtual spaces, whether it's in VR or whether it's in AR? Do we really need a fixed 70-inch TV screen to look at a presentation, or can we all join from our laptop screens and sort of view a presentation shared together? So I think we're going to kind of see increasingly shrunken office footprints, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. Like I would sort of maybe take the stance that I think these virtual spaces in kind of 3 dimensions, in AR and VR, we're seeing a lot of different apps emerge for design review and for architecture review, and the ability to sort of look at 3D models in space and change different materials and sort of actually experience space in 3D and experience the same space with colleagues and to point at things at full scale. So I actually think our collaboration tools have the potential to get better and made more powerful through these different collaboration mediums. And I think they kind of become really impactful too when we actually can point at the same thing at the same time, when we're actually sharing the 3D space as opposed to taking a screenshot and putting it in a 2D deck and then sharing that 2D deck on a Hangout, but when we can kind of be in 3D space present with our colleagues and, kind of point at a 3D detail together, like that's actually where technology really starts to change things and add value over, our kind of current technologies. So again, an optimist about what the future holds here and what the present, because a lot of these apps are already available.
The question I have on it, and it's not actually an answer, I don't have a hypothesis, is how you deal with the social aspects. Because my personal experience is, as a person who's like raging ADD, is that one of the primary functions of the office is social structure on my professional output, right? I'm a person who, in an open office plan, deliberately points my desk at my colleagues so that they can, when they look at me, and I know I can't surf the internet and goof off because I'm going to be monitored. Or I can have a project manager come by and make sure that I'm on top of things because I need to be focused. When I'm in the craft of designing a thing, I usually am sufficiently absorbed that I can get going, but a lot of our work is organizational and it's interactive. And so I've seen so many productivity tools, I mean, to riff on even stuff that Karen's pointed out, that are good at the act of achieving a specific thing, like actually building a thing forward, whether it's coding together or doing three-dimensional modeling together or meeting together or sharing a presentation together. What I haven't seen emerge yet is a way to get those less task-specific things to move forward, where there are benefits to being co-located that are beyond just seeing each other at the water cooler, but how we learn to work in our environments. It seems very strongly embodied, at least it does for me. And I suspect there are ways to digitize that, but I can't perceive them because it's not really my wheelhouse.
I think it's interesting. I heard somewhere recently that the office space as we know it, the modern office, has really only been around for 100 years, right? So this is a moment of what's next, and creating and being thoughtful. I think I'm excited to see. Sharon, this one, something you said prompted this question, and it was mentioning that being slightly older and taking a bit more time to adapt to the avatar technology. With work environments having employees with a large range of ages, how do you think this will affect technology and training to adapt to everyone's technological understanding? And in the work from home era that we're in, how do you see this as a factor in training and maintaining a professional respect for all parties involved?
Oh my God, I love that question. Thank you for that question. So I think it's important, just how we talked about being inclusive of everyone, as we're, I'm in HR, so we're in HR and we're thinking about instructional design, thinking about the different diversity dimensions and understanding that people absorb information differently, their learning agility is different, and their willingness to adapt is different, right? And so for us, it's really about one, being aware of that and meeting people where they are and giving them the support that they need. And that's when we talk about equality, there's that equity piece. So we understand as we get to equality, not everyone's starting from the same place. So I'm starting way further back than many as we talk about these avatars, but recognizing that and designing learning so that you're able to skip forward or slow down, I think is going to be fundamental. And I really think HR has a responsibility there to make sure that we're bringing everyone along. But I think it's a fantastic question. And we're even thinking about, it's very interesting. We're having a lot of conversations in my organization about reskilling and how do we move away from traditional educational requirements and really start thinking about a growth mindset, understanding that everyone is going to have to learn new things in this new world that we're in, regardless of if you have a PhD from MIT or not. There's some things that you're going to have to learn that are new, just as part of our environment is constantly changing. So how do we foster that growth mindset, and how do we reward learning agility and not necessarily past education? And so I think you'll start to see that as a shift. And I can tell you, me as a slow adapter, I'm gonna have to speed it up a little bit. So I'm hoping that my organization will recognize that it is going to take some longer, but we are going to have to all go along on that journey. But thank you. It's a fantastic question.
I'd like to also add to that too, that like in addition to what Sharon was saying, like we need to ask more of our technology and like more of our designers, like our designers or like our technology needs to be more accessible and like more inclusive. Like we shouldn't expect perfection from everyone. Like as Sharon said, like we should meet users where they are at, you know, and so kind of designing for a broad range of access and abilities, like on the kind of designer mentality side is so important, kind of now more than ever, and sort of thinking about people coming to the table with different expectations and different skill sets.
Yeah, I can add a little short bit to that. Is was recently talking with a man who runs a music program, and it was for people that have all different able special needs. And so previously they would sort of all get they would gather in a room, and there would be assistants to help people play guitar or play piano or practice and play together. And so now they've transitioned. They're still holding these sessions, but they're doing it in Zoom. And he started exclaiming how difficult it was just to hear someone that was practicing the piano on this feed and then switching to someone playing guitar. And he was exclaiming that there was so much filtering of noise that was just, he couldn't even hear. He could hear the person whispering from across the room, but he couldn't hear the piano, and he couldn't figure out, why can't I understand? And so we go through this whole interview, and I'm trying to understand what he's actually describing. And finally, at the end of the interview, I say, let's walk through for a second in Zoom where you can actually untick the box that says muffle background noise and enhance like human voices. And he had no idea that was the thing that you could do. And so when we talk about like the technology should be able to lean into what people's needs are and lean into like what the moment, the opportunity is calling for, he was never going to tear through 7 preference panels in Zoom to find this like special tick box. But imagine if there was a mode, right, that was like not audio preferred, not voice preferred mode, or like music practice mode. Like there's ways of thinking about technology that we can start bringing out there that don't just reflect like a mindset of pure technical or like exactly how it's going to work from a computer standpoint, but more of how the person's going to interact with it, designing the technology to adhere to that.
I love all of that. Thank you. So the next question is, with things and experiences going more virtual, there may be a higher security risk for hacking. Example, Zoom bombing. What are some potential security risks we need to be mindful of as we transition and adopt these virtual technologies? I think that's the end of the question.
Sure. I think that one thing is that these technologies now are kind of like Zoom, capturing increasing amounts of data about ourselves. And so questions around data privacy are like, again, increasingly important, always have been important, but sort of like increasingly important to sort of like respect and take very seriously. That like with Zoom, you know, you're sort of giving your whole desktop camera access, you're giving Zoom all these permissions. And so being much more mindful about the permissions that we actively grant as users to these systems in exchange for what. And I think there's going to be more debates about the freemium models moving forward of, you know, is giving up data, whether it's, you know, our digital activity or whether it's actually like our biometric data or, you know, our behavior. That's going to really start to shape a lot of these technologies. And again, it's related to what sort of users will accept. And so it kind of behooves us also to not accept what companies ask for and just ask for things that are actually protect us and protect our privacy.
I suspect the hacking thing is real now, but won't be for long. And maybe that's naive, but I hope it's not. You know, but that because everyone's going to be forced into this environment, and it has been, and that it catches tailwinds of certain big companies, especially companies like Apple, that are promoting end-to-end encryption for everything. That the sanctity of your information when it goes between you and wherever it's going will probably be better secured and better understood. But further just underscores what Karen is saying, which is that if you're not worried about the people who are injecting themselves maliciously in between those points, between you and whoever you're sending it to, then you just have to worry about what they do with it, right? Whether it stays inside of their little bubble and you give it to Google or Amazon or whomever, that they can then process your life and try to sell you more stuff, or whomever it's going to be going to, or who they're going to give it to in turn. And, you know, especially as technology companies are consolidating very strongly, it's the amount of power we concentrate in those things and the amount of ambiguity you have asymmetrically between you and what you know is happening with your data is, I think, probably the bigger risk and the harder one to ascertain. It's much easier to visualize what happens when the peeping Tom looks into your home than what happens when the all-powerful organization knows all of your preferences and can send things your way that causes you to buy things just based on your implicit behaviors that they've already ascertained. And so, you know, I think it's incumbent upon every person to individually start deciding what they're willing to let other people know about each other. Not to lean towards being reclusive, but just start thinking about what you're willing to let your recipients know, even more than the outside actors.
I think it's a fascinating question. I mentioned my cooking class that I have with my girls, and we do it on Zoom. And some of them use their work Zoom and their work computer and their access through their work computer. And it's just interesting to me because we talk about some crazy stuff during cooking class. Like it gets real. And I'm just, like, the company can access this, right? Like this is discoverable. And I think it just never, and I'm in HR, right? So I'm always thinking this way, but my girlfriends aren't thinking this way, right? And so I think, when people are at work and you're in a town hall and you have the anonymous chat on, is it really anonymous? I don't think that we're pausing to just think about these things and who has access to the information and how much are you really exposing, and what do you, to your point, Dave, what do you really want others to know about you? And so I think there's a shift and an awareness that hasn't happened that needs to happen.
I think, yeah, one last build on that is an analogy again, where it's, if you're in a physical space and you're trying to have a conversation, maybe it's a highly sensitive subject with someone, it's really easy to pull them aside and say, let's go for a walk, right? Let's go outside, let's do a lap, and let's like really just hash out this deep issue and know that it just stays between the two of you. And so now when we think about having a meeting like this, like, are there screen shares happening right now? Is someone recording my audio? Is someone taking, like, I have no idea what's happening with the words that I'm saying right now and how those will kind of permeate. So it's this idea that what we are maybe not sacrificing, but what we're having to come to terms with is that the privacy, our idea of what privacy is, and the way that our comfort level and maybe how we want to be able to know that we're in control of it, or maybe instances that we have no control, that's going to be constantly shifting. And I think the more that we have these sort of digital interactions with each other, we'll start to see a shift where a lot of companies, for good reason, will want to kind of give you less control over what your privacy settings are. But I think it's important more now than ever to show very transparently what's happening. What is my voice? How is my image? How are the things that we're talking about and saying right now going to be captured, and will they live on forever? Is this a private conversation that I know is just to understand each other better? Like, there's a lot, I think, wrapped up in that, and we're just at the surface right now, right? All of these tools that we're using technology right now to host this meeting, especially, they're things that are just at the very beginning of what will be a long tail sort of transformation. And I think we're just starting to see the impact with Zoom bombing as the first example. But I have a positive perspective, but I think we will see some more evolutions of how communication digitally kind of evolves in the coming years.
And one last comment there too. I think even interestingly, like modalities that we used to assume were more private, like voice, now necessarily aren't, or like are no longer, that's no longer a valid assumption that we have voice transcription. We have natural language processing. So we have these new kind of incredibly powerful technologies that like are maybe remaking some of these kind of conventional ways of communicating, that we just kind of, again, need to be mindful and like ask for transparency and, encourage transparency in the things that we make.
I wrote down a note, Karen, that you had said earlier that tech is not neutral. And this question and answer piece, I think it brings us to think that we need to think about that both as designers and as users. So we have a couple more good ones. The next question is, I think the problem I have found with virtual interactions is that people are hesitant to speak up, ask questions, or criticize because they don't want to hurt feelings or be in the spotlight with a question. I think when we are not in person and speaking through text or an avatar, nuances in body language are lost because it's a little desensitized. So I guess, more of a statement, but any thoughts on that?
No, but just completely agree. And there's, kind of bodies of research and literature and, whole kind of academic domains that study that and kind of try to understand like the embodiment spectrum. And those are all kind of questions around how we communicate. And it's widely sort of understood, as everyone can feel and sense, that like text is the least embodied format of communication. We kind of lose all that nuance of, voice inflection. We lose the nuance of like head movement or hand movement and sort of like of nonverbal cues and of actual kind of natural body language. So again, this is maybe overly techno-optimistic, but like these kind of, with advanced sensing and with AR and VR, we can actually gain some of that embodiment back and that liveliness. So with like 6 degrees of freedom sensing and with different types of sort of like awareness about your behavior, we can kind of add more embodiment back to communication. So I think embodiment has a lot of things to offer over voice and email and text. And, we should do more things in 3D because it actually is a richer format of communication.
I have a thought on that being the idea that we're never going to be able to take everything that existed in our physical world and the way that we did things previously and just pick them up and drop them right into our more digital first kind of reality that we're all experiencing right now. It's just not going to work. And so the ways that we're chatting with each other, these are tools that are not designed for those things that Karen's talking about. And so when we think about, well, how do I actually like back chat? How do I like whisper? Can I digitally whisper to Karen? That was a good point. Like, it's impossible for me to do that right now without it being overtly obvious to everyone, at like all of the people watching. And so those abilities, I think they're latent. They haven't come about just yet. And as these tools, as designers are starting to create ways for people to recognize and say, hey, you can no longer whisper in the digital meeting, but that's an important reality of how humans communicate in the way that virtually there's no way to do that in like an effective manner right now. But I think those are on the way, and they might actually take forms that aren't just lifted right from the real world of us like physically whispering, but there might be gestural or communication. Maybe you can sense what I'm thinking without actually needing to express it overtly. So I think we're just starting to see some of that stuff now.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that and say part of my job is investigations and understanding, extracting from team members how they feel and what their experience is. And it's a lot easier to do that in person. I feel like I can really get to the heart of the issue and break people down and, look them in the eyes, tell me if you said it. But there's something about being on, screen where you just don't get those same cues, and I don't necessarily know inherently where to dig in, where to start, where to stop. So for me, that is a challenge in my day job, and some of that is definitely lost. And so I have to work twice as hard to build the relationships before we ever get to those conversations, so that some of that trust is there, because some of it is built through just the in-person human connection that you just don't get in this world. So if you can make that whisper happen, someone, that would be awesome. That would help.
I love that, the whisper chat.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question, and again, I think it's a good one. Out of this unprecedented experience, is there something you are concerned about that may change permanently for all of us? How do we maintain our dignity and connection to humanness? A good one, but not an easy one.
Yeah, I have something immediately that comes to mind. Well, first it was just that we were losing our humanness by like jacking into the matrix, and that's sort of what the question is implying, is that we're all soon going to become batteries for the machines. But on a more optical or optimistic point of view, I think when we think about the opportunities, or we think about the things that make us human and the dignity that we are experiencing, and what's their potential to lose, I like to have the perspective of what do we have to gain. And so when we think about these issues of privacy, and we think about equity, and we think about communication and collaboration, like all of these topics that we talked about Today, it's a challenge, right? And Sharon was actually talking about how it's like it's different populations. It can be even more challenging to adapt and to have new ways of thinking and learning and change. Change can be very difficult, right? And so I think from my perspective, it's trying to understand where can we actually peel back and understand like the opportunities that we are just starting to see that are emerging out there, and the idea that like we can actually think about the physical spaces as moments that are even more intentionally designed to amplify an intention, right? And so we're saying everything that we're doing digitally now, meeting and having things of like cooking classes, and those are all happening digitally, and they may or may not change over time, but recognizing that it's going to make those moments even more special when I can meet again in person, and we can amplify that moment in a way that it was just second nature, that we'd see each other every day. That's what I'm looking forward to, is even if digital becomes more a part of my life every single day, it's going to make those in-person moments, as we become safer to return back to interacting with each other in person, even more special. So that's sort of what I'm looking forward to.
And I think that's really key language too, about amplifying and not losing sight of the human sort of using the technology, or in some cases wearing the technology, and that it's not about technology to kind of replace humanity or replace human expression or human capability, but to amplify and to kind of augment. And in a kind of a very like practical example from designing some of these avatar systems, it's when presented of a choice, you know, it's not adding a laugh track, it's creating technology that can actually sense laughter in real time, or like on the Zoom call, instead of sort of like adding fun effects that would like blur out our natural expressions, we should create technology that actually just shows, you know, rich human expression, because humans are really wonderful, you know, and like we are so expressive. And so like you create technology with intentionality to kind of celebrate humanity, as opposed to sort of like replace or dampen it.
I think to answer the question pretty directly in terms of what I'd be worried about losing, which I think is parallel to a lot of things that Mike and Karen are speaking on, is that if we shift towards the digital I think is largely structured around transaction. And I don't mean that just in terms of commerce, but in terms of speaking one-to-one or 1-to-5 or 1-to-5 with a lot of people paying attention, in that it is still like I go, you go, I go, you go, she goes, he goes. And that we're usually for a purpose. Like we, you know, Sharon's highly scheduled experiences, social as they are still structured. They're there to do some purpose. Like, and that purposefulness, I think, can masquerade as being meaningful, but it also like it loses its ability to be serendipitous. And like, you know, surely someday again we'll travel, but like one of the things that I really miss right now is because my work takes me to overseas to Asia quite a bit, where most of the factories are located, and I don't speak Chinese. When I would go into a public space, I can't hear people bicker about what their coworker said or why their coffee's the wrong temperature. I just hear people, right? And so there's something for me that's very beautiful about just being in the presence of humanity and that thrum and the ability to be participating as part, you know, to feel your sense in both its magnitude and its finitude as being one of the 7-8 billion people on the planet. And right now it feels like it's one-to-one, and the intimacy of that I think is, has an allure, but it's really incomplete. And I'm worried that as we get accustomed to being in these kind of social interactions that are digitized, that they will also start to have blinders on, and we'll lose some of the perspective for kind of fellow humans.
Yeah, I think for me, when I worry about my back, you all probably see me shifting in my chair. I'm in my chair, I think, 15 hours a day. So I'm definitely over back-to-back meetings. And to Dave's point, that's the purpose, and the one-to-one interaction is just all day long. But what keeps me up at night is I'm thinking about who's getting left behind in this new virtual world. And I'm thinking about my friends that are single and, you know, live by themselves, and what is their experience like, and those that I said don't have access to internet, or those who are in a home where there is abuse going on, whether it's physical or verbal, and they're in that environment all day long and there is no outlet now. So I'm just thinking about all the different ways, as we're moving forward in this virtual world, there are others who are stuck, and how do we create an environment where they too can come along in the experience. So that's what's top of mind, and I don't have the answer for that, but I'm certainly putting a lot of thought into it.
Well, and I think that's kind of a perfect ending note for us, and that our hope is that by continuing this conversation and by sharing that with the 100+ people that joined us tonight, that we can continue to think about it and do better and, make sure that we're thoughtful. So again, thank you to all of you. This has been so wonderful. And we appreciate it so much. Thank you to all of our attendees. We're at the end of our program, and I think the final thing that we are going to touch on in closing is a little bit about IIDA and what we do in the advocacy work specifically that we do. So we want to take a moment to acknowledge the powerful contribution that designers make in our community. That powerful contribution is one of the reasons IIDA is working to elevate the commercial interior design profession. What does that mean? What does elevating the profession look like? We strive to raise public awareness of our work and correct misconceptions of what we do. You may have heard some of these common examples when you tell friends and family that you're an interior designer. We also do a little bit more than that, though. We do some advocacy work. We meet with California lawmakers to educate them on the impact we make in their communities by highlighting projects like libraries, office buildings, and hospitals that serve their constituents. And we advocate for the legal recognition of our profession as practitioners who affect the health, safety, and welfare of our community. We would like and urge you to use your voice and join the effort to elevate our profession. You can text interior designer to 52886. You can take the IIDA Design Professionals Survey, and you can virtually attend IIDA's National Advocacy Symposium this September. Check out the chat box for a link to the survey and the symposium event page. And as always, please continue to join us in these thoughtful conversations. And again, thank you, Dave, Mike, Sharon, and Karen, and to everybody who joined. We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.